This is a $7.2 million check the United States used to purchase Alaska from Russia. A gigantic 660,000 square miles of land, water, and mountains was bought for a meager 2 cents per acre, which made the purchase of Alaska one of the biggest and one of the cheapest real estate deals in history. But how Alaska became a part of Russia in the first place, and why it sold such a gem to the United States, and did the US actually gain something from the deal for the price it paid to buy Alaska? You see, Alaska was a found piece of land by Danish explorer Vitus Bering and a Russian explorer Alexei Chirikov during Second Kamchatka expedition in the mid-18th century. On July 15, 1741, Chirikov sighted the west side of Prince of Wales Island, and just 1 day later, on July 16, Vitus Bering and his crew sighted Mount Saint Elias on mainland Alaska. Both of the exploring parties stayed on the mainland Alaska for a few months exploring resourcefulness of the land and returned back to Russia in 1742 with otter pelts they gathered by hunting sea otters. In 1742, the word of newly explored land and very high quality of otter pelts spread quickly, which sparked Russia's interest to claim Alaska. Sailors and workers with their families, especially from the indigenous Sibero-Russian tribes, started to sail to settle in Alaska within a year from its discovery. They colonized various islands and the mainland of Alaska by forcing the indigenous Aleuts tribes into labor, hunting for fish and otter pelts. 4 decades later, in 1784, with the rise in Russian colonization and pelt trade in Alaska, Grigory Ivanovich Shelekov, a Russian seafarer, established the Russian Americanmonopoly and appointed Alexander Andreyevich Baranov as the manager for the company. Over the course of 3 decades, Baranov controlled all of the fur trade and established a very strong monopoly in the Alaskan region. Later, he also became the first governor of Alaska, which was officially called Russian America. But Russia never had a complete hold of the entirety of Alaska. They mostly dominated the coast and various islands scattered along the coast, and Russian settlers had to regularly fight native Alaskan tribes in order to maintain their control. The Russian and Aleut allied forces also had to fight the indigenous Tlingit tribe in the Battle of Sitka, which was the last major battle between indigenous tribes and the Russian settlers. Gradually, the sea otter population started to decline due to overhunting, and the Russian American monopoly started to weaken further during the mid-19th century. In succeeding years, British Hudson Bay Company established its ports towards the southern end of Russian America under the RAC-HBC agreement that adversely impacted the Russian business as the Hudson Bay Company started to siphon off Russian trade. Now you might be thinking, how in the world the British got hold of southern parts of Russian America? It's because in 1763 Treaty of Paris, France handed over major parts of Canada to the British Empire, enabling them to expand their trade towards the northwest. This was the first time Russians had a direct confrontation with the powerful British in the Alaskan wilderness. The area, which was once dominated by the Russians, was slipping out of their hands. In 1818, Alexander Baranov retired, which further weakened their control. Then in 1853, Russia entered into the Crimean War with the United Kingdom and its allies that caused severe damage to both Russia and the opposing Allied forces. With increased rivalry between the Russians and the British, weakening of Russian America, severe decline in trade opportunities, increasing British presence in a far-fetched, freezing and hostile wilderness, Tsar Alexander II, who was then the Emperor of Russia, desperately started to look for opportunities to sell Alaska, because it would have been very difficult to defend the land across the Bering Strait in any further war with the British. And Alexander II never wanted the beautiful land of Alaska to fall in the hands of the British. So who could have been a better fit for the sale other than the United States? At the end of the American Civil War, U.S. Secretary of the State William Seward entered into negotiation with the Russian minister Eduard de Stockel for the purchase of Alaska. On March 30, 1867, both Seward and Stockel agreed to the treaty that was ratified by the United States Senate. But the question is, why the U.S. wanted to purchase Russian America as much as the Russians wanted to get rid of it? You see, the U.S. got its independence in just the last century in 1776. So it was pretty young and expanding. In fact, the United States went on a shopping spree, claiming and buying new portions of the land previously owned by French, British, and Spanish invaders. The US purchased an enormous centered territory of mainland America from the French First Republic in 1803, famously called the Louisiana Purchase. Later, it started expanding and claiming new territories towards the west and parts of Northwest Pacific by defeating Mexicans. Then in 1848, America struck a gold mine. Literally. In the newly claimed land of California, James W. Marshall, an ordinary carpenter, found gold at the riverbank near Sacramento. The word spread quickly across the nation, and more than 300,000 people all over the country flocked to the state of California in search of gold that gave birth to the famous California Gold Rush. Drawing from the similar conclusion that Alaska could hold massive quantities of gold and iron, which would also add significantly to the American-Asian trade by making America physically closer to Asia via the ownership of Alaska, William Seward took a bet and was able to convince the Senate for the purchase. On October 18, 1867, in the Alaskan town of Sitka, the Russian flag was lowered and the American flag was raised amongst the officials and soldiers of both the countries, and Alaska was officially transferred to the United States of America. The U.S. following the transfer changed its name from Russian America to what we all know today as Alaska. Later, in 1868, on August 1st, the United States wrote a check worth $7.2 million in favor of Russia, making the purchase of Alaska financially official. Media and public reactions for the purchase was mostly positive, but some opposed the purchase and called it Seward's folly or Seward's icebox because they assumed the U.S. has purchased a cold wasteland with the hardworking taxpayers' money. After the purchase, the Russian settlers still living in Alaska were given the option to accept American citizenship, but most of them denied and went back to Russia. And during the time, there was not much to do in Alaska, and on top of it, the harsh weather made it more repulsive for the people to settle there. Gradually, the population started to decline rapidly, and the town of Sitka was left with only a few hundred people. Until, in 1896, William Seward's prediction came true, and yet another gold mine was found in the Klondike region of Yukon. And as always, people follow where the money is. More than 100,000 people rushed to parts of Yukon and Alaska, triggering a stampede of prospectors. Few became wealthy, and for the most, their efforts in finding gold went into vain. This helped to boost the population of Alaska momentarily, but later few decided to settle in Alaska itself. Gradually, the fishing and timber industry started to take shape, and Alaska became one of the major territories for the industry. Few decades later, Alaska received its statehood in 1959, and in 1968, oil was discovered in the northern region of Alaska at the Prudhoe Bay, making it one of the largest oil discoveries in the entire North America. Since then, Alaska has become one of the largest producers of natural gas and oil in the entire country. Recently, in March 2023, the Willow project, an oil development project, received approval for oil extraction by the Biden administration, and it is estimated to produce 200,000 barrels of oil per day in the span of its anticipated 30 years life. The state of Alaska has a significant contribution towards the nation's economy that has surpassed the cost of buying it from Russia many times over. It generates a staggering $49 billion of revenue in terms of GDP through its rich reserves, tourism, and other sectors, and provides jobs to more than 300,000 residents. However, reaping benefits from the resource-rich land of Alaska is easier said than done. It is a harsh, cold, and at the same time, very fragile environment near the Arctic. And the Arctic is the region that holds enormous amounts of natural gas resources as well. Therefore, other nations like Russia, Canada, Sweden, etc. are gearing up to tap into the Arctic that could also put fragile Alaska into harm's way. In fact, we have made an exclusive video on the topic, how the Arctic can become a game changer for these nations, and we have also provided the link in the description. So do check that out to know the full story. The purchase of Alaska has always been referenced as the bargain basement deal and a positive sum accomplishment of the presidency of Andrew Johnson. Since its purchase over the course of 150 years, Alaska has proven itself time and time again one of the greatest assets the United States has ever had. This is Stories Across, and thank you for watching.